Okay, so recording in progress. I am going to go live on Facebook. Here we go.
Yay.
You know, I just realized that I think I need to know my Facebook password. I never know it.
Debbie, are the Sylmar Charter High School, are you guys the Spartans?
Oh yeah.
I did not realize that. That's better than the Barristers. I've been the Barristers and the Demos.
Yeah,
Grammar.
I know. We
And-
kind of make fun of those people.
Yeah, and my own high school was the Conquistadors, which is
Uh-huh.
sort of creepy.
I was a coyote.
I love the Coyote. I mean, the Coyotes are survivors.
All right, here we go.
Who wants a barrister on the sideline during a football game? Really, who wants a barrister?
Right.
Okay. We're setting it up. Nicole, do you remember what I do so that I don't hear myself?
You can mute the Facebook page.
Got it. All right. So supposedly we are streaming live.
I see us.
I mean, I see us too.
Yay.
And
Happy rainy Monday, everybody.
I think I just turned the volume off.
Perfect.
Okay. I didn't turn the volume off because I hear myself still.
Mhm.
Okay. Now we're good. Can people hear us?
I see somebody giving us a heart, so we are
Okay.
good to go.
We've got folks. Great. All right. Well, welcome. It's another Facebook Live. I feel like we should have like an intro
A
song.
theme song.
Who's gonna play? You're live with me.
We should get Lionel to sing a little something.
Oh, that would be adorable.
That'd be pretty funny, right?
Well, welcome, Debbie. We are so incredibly happy to have you here. And hi, Nicole.
Hey, Jenna. How was your rainy Monday? Was it everything you wanted?
All I want is rain. I should live in Seattle. I think I would be the happiest person ever if I lived in Seattle.
It is pretty magnificent. And all my classes were like super mellow today. Everybody was just like, yeah, let's read. I'm like, love those
Meanwhile,
rainy
the elementary
days.
school, right? But meanwhile, the elementary school teachers are like, Jenna, we're going to burn you down if you say that again. I remember when I was teaching, this was probably like 2005 or 2006, and we had these insane rainstorms. Like I remember, it was when I lived, like there was like a river near me and it like flooded over, like it was crazy. And I just remember looking at I taught 5th grade and I was like, all of you all want to kill me. It was brutal. We had like 2 weeks indoors.
Oh, yeah, that's a lot.
Anyway, so Debbie, we are super excited to have you here to talk about EChoices and magnets and all of that entails.
The labyrinth.
And the labyrinth. We're going to have you with us for about an hour, and we're going to try to get through as many questions as we can. And let's start out with you, though. If you can just give us a little intro and tell us about you and magnets and why we care and all that good stuff.
Sure. So my name's Debbie Steinert. I'm the magnet coordinator at Sylmar Charter High School Science Tech Math Magnet. It's been my honor and privilege to serve there since we opened in 1994. So this is my 28th year. So I should hopefully be able to answer whatever questions you throw at me regarding magnets, and I'll do my best on all of the other programs. Prior to that, I was a science teacher and at Olive Vista Middle School. And fun fact, I am a proud graduate of both of those schools, and my children are graduates of our program. So before we answer questions about magnets, let me explain why we have magnets, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about them. A lot of people believe magnets exist to serve students that are accelerated or gifted. And that's not actually why we're here. And that is true in many other districts, but not ours. So in 1963, there was a court case called the Crawford case. And I won't go too much into the history. Sorry, Nicole, I know you like that subject. The Crawford case found that LAUSD was what they called de facto guilty of segregation. LAUSD never segregated its schools on purpose. That would be de jure, but de facto means we ended up being segregated because of other factors in the community, such as the fact that real estate agents would only sell property to certain ethnicities in certain communities. So you had distinct white communities, Black communities, Latino communities, and that made our schools segregated, even though we never endeavored to do that. So in 1978, they finally, after many years of back and forth arguing, the school district was required by court order to desegregate. So for a few years, there was forced busing where they took kids from schools that were predominantly white, sent them to schools that were predominantly not white, and vice versa. This was not very popular, obviously, with parents and students, and even teachers got sent to different schools. So LAUSD people, including Ted Alexander, who was in charge of that and magnets at the time, we had a few magnets prior to that, decided we could voluntarily integrate all of LAUSD through programs such as magnets. And another program we still have is called PWT, or Permit with Transportation. So students in schools that were predominantly not white could get transportation to schools that were predominantly white, which we really don't have much anymore anyway. So the idea was to put magnets throughout the district into schools that they needed to draw students of whatever, I'll call them flavor, into those schools. So they don't exist to serve necessarily just gifted students or students interested in a particular subject. They exist to serve all students in providing our court-ordered desegregation program. So, and becoming or being a magnet student doesn't mean that that child has been deemed special in any way. I mean, of course, they're all special, especially to their parents, but it doesn't have anything to do with that particular child. And gifted programs are the only ones that have the criteria with the magnets to be accepted. The rest of the magnets, if they're not labeled gifted, anybody can attend. Students with disabilities, English learners, anybody. So there's that.
That's super interesting. I actually didn't know the history of that either.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the busing. I had friends coming in from all over different parts of the city to where I went to high school, and they spent a lot of time on buses. It was really sort of intense for them.
But it's also the process has evolved a little bit though, right? Because when I was a kid, I went to an LAUSD magnet, but I asked my parents, like, it wasn't the same with all the points and like in the same, like now it feels like even for the gifted magnets, you have to test in, but you also have to have the points.
That was actually true. That was all true back then. You may not have been aware, just as many parents now are not aware of how points are accrued. And back then, lacking social media and internets and all of that, there was no, really great way to convey that. I'm not going to make you divulge here, but you look young enough that it would have been in a time period when they did have points and stuff.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm 43. It's not, I mean, it's not a secret.
Yes, they did, because you are only 1 year older than my oldest graduating class. And yes, they did have points, even well before that.
So can we talk about the sort of dynamic, very briefly, the dynamic between sort of magnets and our neighborhood schools? Because, we are a group that is dedicated to uplifting and supporting and defending our neighborhood schools as sort of the hubs and the hearts of our communities. And so when we have options like the magnet schools, do they serve our neighborhood schools well? Like, like in terms of sort of fitting into like the ecosystem of LAUSD, are they hurting our neighborhood schools? Are they helping our neighborhood schools? Can you speak to that?
So first, what I'd like to say is, I know a lot of parents are probably here because they're worried I have to get my kid into the right school. The most important thing for your kid is you. And if you are being a great parent, which you probably are, if you're here tonight, you are doing the thing that is going to make your kids successful. And honestly, they could go to any school in LAUSD and survive and thrive and become whatever they want to become. And our neighborhood schools, if I remember during the strike, how much the parents in this group were talking about how much they love their school, their teachers, how much they were supporting. So that would be strong evidence that basically you could land anywhere in LAUSD and get a good education. And I strongly believe in that. And I believe that's true for my own neighborhood school. And magnets, well, it's kind of a two-sided thing. You know, you're right, having students leave to go to magnets could be somewhat of a drain of the parents who tend to be more knowledgeable. And so they understood that you had to apply almost a year in advance and go through whatever hoops. So that takes parents that might be likely to be more involved, but that doesn't mean that in neighborhood schools, there are no parents left that are involved or caring. And as far as the students, given that our magnet schools, notwithstanding the gifted magnets, take anyone, it isn't necessarily what most people would assume a brain drain.
I think it's also like, I look at my own personal story with this, which Nicole knows, but Debbie, I don't know that you do. I actually, I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. My 13-year-old went to our local neighborhood school all the way through. And then in third grade, my 11-year-old got into a specific magnet that, you know, I had heard great things about. And after talking to his teachers, and we sort of made the tough decision to actually pull him from our neighborhood school and send him to this magnet. And which I don't regret that we did, because I think we needed to know. And we pulled him mid-year and went back to our neighborhood school. And so I think that the one thing that I would offer is like really weigh pros and cons, right? So for us, getting up an hour and a half earlier, you know, changing in the back seat of the car to go to after school activities because he's home an hour later than he was used to, not having friends in the neighborhood, that was hard. So all of these things, I think if anything, what the pandemic has taught us is that academics aren't the only thing that matter. Mental health is really, really important. And so at the end of the day, when we pulled our son, it really was a personal well-being choice, not an academic choice. And I think that as parents, sometimes we're so laser focused on like the academic best choice. Yeah, I don't know, my personal.
Everything you say is so true and mirrors very much what happened with myself and my brothers. I went all the way through our neighborhood schools. My next brother down, it went to, Valley Alternative then, Lake Balboa now, because when he hit high school, he definitely is not good at being a small fish in a big pond. He needed that smaller environment, despite being highly gifted and perfectly capable of dealing with whatever they threw at him academically. It wasn't a good environment for him. It was a perfect environment for me. And then the youngest one, who was, you know, just that child that was super smart, but usually not doing what he should be doing despite my parents' best efforts. He ended up going there for part of elementary, but returning to our local schools because he did need the bigger variety of courses and things to challenge him. So every child has different needs. And like I said, all of those schools are awesome schools, but your child may have specific things that would work best for them. Some of them, you know, like me, I preferred the big school at the time of almost 3,000 students with all the different programs, where, you know, my little brother, not so much.
I think that's a really astute point that you make. Teaching in an SAS program at Marshall High School, and at the same time we have a gifted magnet on campus as well. And families are always asking, well, which program is better? What's, you know, what should I do? What should we do here? I'm like, well, you know, you really ought to like visit classrooms, go on the tour. You should talk to students. You should talk to families who go, because it really is sort of dependent on the student and the student's needs. And there are different flavors. And, I think that families are sort of the best experts, right, about what their students need.
And
And
it's,
we
I
should,
wish we were
yeah.
doing in-person tours again. I feel like it's such a, just, I mean, as someone who's looking at high schools right now, it's really hard to
And-
make, and I have a son who started middle school that we'd never stepped foot on campus. It's our local middle school, but still it was,
And what you mentioned about things like transportation and all that comes with going to a school outside of your neighborhood. My children did attend magnets outside of our neighborhood for elementary and middle school, but our magnet happens to be also our neighborhood school. And so that, by the time the kids were in high school, the fact that they were involved in, sports and band and all the other stuff and doing a lot more in the way of group projects where they might need to meet up with friends, having them local was just, it's just so much easier. Notwithstanding the fact that I actually work there, so I didn't care when the swim team bus rolled in. But my nieces and nephews, at some point, all of them considered coming to our school. And while I think we would have served them well, they live at least a half-hour drive away without traffic. And we all know what LA is like. And I just said to them, I think we do a good job and all of that, but I don't know that it's worth it to be on the road a couple hours a day for you to go to high school. I think you can find good things a little closer and enjoy your time. So before you jump in, as much as it would be great to have Aunt Debbie there and all of that, traveling is not a lot of fun.
So with that, I think that there's two, we have a long list of questions, but I think they're kind of specific. I think the two big questions, the first is, how do you even know where to begin? Let's say I'm a parent, right? And I hear all these words, magnet, SAS, all these things. Where do I begin?
So maybe we should talk about the different programs that are available. And like I said, I would kind of reasonably be called, I guess, an expert in magnets, and maybe not as much in the others, but I have a general idea. SAS, or School for Advanced Studies, are programs that are run in essence, kind of like a school within a school, in anything from elementary through high school, where students should be either gifted or high achieving. The benchmark for having that determined is a little bit easier than through the magnet program, where there's a lot more documentation involved. But generally speaking, those classes would be taught at an honors level, and in the high schools, then one would think they would have AP involved as well. So that is one program, and you can apply to schools for advanced studies at a variety of different schools. And then we have zones of choice. This is something our district started doing, maybe about 10, well, more than that. Whenever they opened Roybal and Contreras downtown, the schools that relieved overcrowding for Belmont, they built a couple of schools really within a couple of blocks of the old Belmont High School, which was serving 5,000 students. And rather than carving up this really tiny neighborhood into 5 different, or however many schools, there's 4 maybe down there, they gave students a choice to choose which school they wanted, and each school had different academies in it. Most of our high schools are divided into smaller learning communities or academies. And that was a great idea for Belmont, where you're really quick walking distance to any one of those schools. They've done the same in a few areas in the valley. For example, my area, which is Silmar, San Fernando, and Chavez, where from my house, where I'm sitting right now, to the closest school, Silmar High, it's 3.5 miles, but it's about 5 or 6 to San Fernando. Basically, it's not walking distance. So doing this zone of choice in our area really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But whatever, I don't run the LAUSD, thankfully. And so zone of choice is another choice on there, where you can choose, you are forced to choose, if you live in one of those areas, between the schools in your area. They do a similar thing around Valley Academy of Arts and Sciences, Northridge Academy, and that area. And I know there are others within our district. I'm not as familiar, so I can't rattle off all the names. So if you live in one of those areas, rather than just automatically being sent to your local school, you choose between one of those choices there. And many of those schools you're choosing with academies within each of those schools. Then we have, I think PWT is still on there, although that is pretty limited in where those choices happen. Let me think, what else is on there? Affiliated charters. So schools that are still part of LAUSD yet charters, such as Sylmar Charter High School, you have to apply to those if you live outside of their attendance boundary. So anybody who would normally go to Sylmar or be in our zone of choice doesn't apply through the charter. It's only if somebody, let's say from Reseda, decided they wanted to come to our school, they would apply through the charter. So that gets a little confusing because you have two different ways to get in, but it really only applies to separate sets of people. Am I missing? Oh, we also have dual language programs, and there are a variety of different kinds as to whether it's immersion in both languages, more immersion in one or the other. And that's something you really should consult each school about to see whether that school fits what your child needs. Am I missing any of them?
That sounds about right. But just to reiterate for folks, if you are a resident, it's a different process, right? If you are living within the boundaries of that school's neighborhood, it is a different process than if you live outside of the neighborhood.
So let me pick on a school that I believe isn't in a zone of choice area, would be Van Nuys High School. If you live in Van Nuys area, you just automatically get to go there, and the middle school sends up the data and so on. Whereas if you live in Sylmar, you have to pick between Sylmar, Chavez, and San Fernando through zone of choice.
How would you know if you're in a zone of choice?
You know, that is a good question. Now, the middle schools, and I'm sure the elementary schools, if there are zones of choice for middle school, I don't even know if there are, but I know that the middle schools communicate that a lot to the kids if they're in kind of the feeder area. So like Frost, well, they don't necessarily shouldn't overlap. A lot of our students that live in our community do go to Frost. And so in fact, they had tonight a parent meeting about that. But you could go on to the zone of choice thing and the site for the district. If you just Google zone of choice, LAUSD, there is a site and it lists the different schools that are part of zone of choice.
Okay.
Also, one thing about magnets, you must live within LAUSD's boundaries. You can go to any magnet if you live in LAUSD's boundaries, but if you live outside, let's say Santa Clarita, and you use a Santa Clarita address, you will, it's do not pass go at that point.
Yeah, that's like a whole other like permits and between the districts. It's a whole thing.
You won't be getting it if you live, because magnets are so popular, it would be hard to justify to our parents in our district why their child didn't get in, but we let in somebody from Burbank or Glendale or whatever. Sure. Whereas for affiliated charters, you can, that's all you have to do if you want to apply to affiliated charter and you get in. And then other schools, there are, as you mentioned, permits and other ways.
And then there's something with magnets where you can get bus transportation, right?
Many magnets, not all, have transportation.
Okay.
Some magnets are called continuous enrollment magnets. So in a few cases, they took an entire school and just said this school, which was normally a resident, neighborhood school, is now a magnet, just kind of lock, stock, and barrel. And those programs generally do not have transportation. And those programs you can apply, if you move in the neighborhood, you can apply to get in. Whereas in all of the rest of the magnets, typically you have to apply through choices, and then you, we can't admit students after the 4th week of the first semester, and then again in the spring semester from our waiting list. So it isn't like if a kid moved into my neighborhood now, they wouldn't just automatically be able to walk into the school and start tomorrow, even if I had an opening.
Can we talk about the points?
Sure, I'd love to do that. Can I share the graphic?
Yeah.
Yes, please school us on points, because we have a collection of questions about like how to accumulate points, what happens if you lose points, what happens if you are are applying to so many programs and you get into one and not the other, and points, 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 points.
Right. And it's confusing. And let me just like not act like I'm a dork and know how to share things the right thing. Okay. So I have here a graphic. There's a max of 23 points you can earn. And I'm going to go through what they're for based on this picture. If you have a sibling who is attending the magnet you're applying to for a younger child. So in my family, my son Jeremy, 3 years older than my daughter. So he was going to be a senior when we applied for my daughter to attend our school, and he was going to be continuing in our program. So he gets 3 points. This isn't like college where there's legacy points because your dad graduated from there. The older child has to still be continuing to be enrolled. And the idea is so that parents aren't driving kids, to 4 different schools. It isn't because the family is more special. It's just to acknowledge that parents, are struggling enough already to get their kids to school. So sibling points is one way. And I know there's a lot of talk about if you turn down a magnet and you lose points. I'll get more to that, but you don't lose all your points. There's certain points that would stay. Sibling would be one of those. If that older child is still going to be there, let's say you turn down a 9th grade position, but the child was still going to be there when you applied for 10th grade, they still get that. Overcrowded. Now, overcrowded used to be a way for lots of people to earn points when we had lots of overcrowded schools. We have very few anymore. I don't even know if we have any now. And so if your resident school, the school you would normally attend, was overcrowded, then you would get 4 points for that. And that also stays with you, even if you turn down a magnet the next year. And they're looking at the program that you would be going into grade level wise. So if you're currently a middle school student, it's the high school you would attend for next year as a 9th grader that we're looking at. The same thing with PHBAO, which stands for predominantly Hispanic, Black, Asian, and other. So if your resident school is predominantly not white, that's easier to say, you get 4 points. Now, virtually all of the schools in the district are that. So kind of everybody's almost on the same playing field with the 4 points for overcrowded. Most people don't have that. And the 4 points for their school being predominantly not white. So most people do have 4 points for that. Next is, I'm going to skip the waiting list. I'm going to go to matriculation. If you are matriculating from a magnet school in one level, elementary to middle or middle to high school, you get 12 points. So for elementary school students, that's only when they matriculate to middle school for 6th grade. So even if you went to a magnet in all of elementary school and you didn't apply to one in 6th grade, but you applied to 7th, those points don't go with. It's only the year you matriculate. Same with high school. If you go from middle school from 8th grade to 9th grade, you get the 12 points if you're coming from a middle school magnet. Or, not both, but or if you applied to magnets within the last 3 years and were not accepted, you get 4 waiting list points for each year you're not accepted. So let's say you are, and this is where people learn to game the system. So let's say you have a child in elementary school, and we're going to call that perfect elementary. It's your neighborhood school and you really love it, but you really strongly want them to get into really cool middle school. You start applying to a magnet for 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. And if you pick a magnet that typically has a very long waiting list, you probably won't get in. And so you start racking up those waiting list points. And so that's what parents will do. Now, if you get accepted and you don't take the spot because you really love your resident school, then you lose those points just for the waiting list points. You don't lose the sibling or the overcrowded or PHBAO. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So
I think
one parent asked that question I saw in the chat, should they do that? And how would they know whether a school had waiting list points? Can I show you that?
Yeah.
So if you were to go to, I'm hoping I'm clicking on the right one because I got too many tabs open. That's not what I want. Go to the one that was what I wanted. Sorry. Let me shut this little reminder thing off. This is the, or is it not? Anyway, if you just Google LAUSD magnets. Go to the LAUSD magnets page. You will see right here, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving around, it says school list. And if you click on that, and it's not really obvious, there's so much else going on. If you click on that, it will take you to an alphabet where you can click on the various schools alphabetically. And so to illustrate that parent's point, first I picked Broadus Elementary. And if you scroll down, it shows you what their program capacity is, how many applicants they received last year. Not that last year is necessarily a predictor of this year, but that's what happened. And then how many openings they had. So they only got 5 applicants for 27 openings. So the chances of getting in there would be very good. So if you're trying to game the system by getting points, don't apply to Broadus. No offense to Broadus. I'm sure it's a great place. I know a teacher over there. But on the other hand, if you applied to community charter and you scroll down, they had 2,832 applicants for 90 spaces. Now, what this doesn't tell you is what grade level were those spaces in. Generally, most of them are going to be in the grade level that the school starts with. So in my case for high school, if I said I had, let's say 115 openings, 107 of those are 9th grade openings and just a handful of others. So if you're applying for an older grade, it's a little hard to predict what that all means. But for the first grade of that school, whatever that is, K1, 6th grade for middle or 9th grade for high school, this will give you a ballpark idea. So if you're trying to game this system, go just poke at those schools, try to figure out which ones have the highest number of applicants compared to the number of seats, and your chances of getting in wouldn't be as good. And so you might be put on a waiting list. So that's how you play that game. Nicole is shaking her head.
My mind is blown.
I mean,
My
I
mind
just
is
want to
blown.
say that, you know, when we started with LAUSD with our own children and my husband was like, oh my God, we have to get in on this magnet game. I was like, I cannot even wrap my head around it. And I work for LAUSD. So this is very helpful for folks who are trying to sort of navigate the system. Okay.
What
Oof.
other like cool tricks are there?
Well, in terms of getting points, that's it. Really, there
Okay.
is. I have seen on many posts on the Parent Supporting Teachers page, you'll have a lot of parents, oh, if you just keep calling this school, they'll move you up on the list. No, we're not able to do that.
Wait, can I interrupt? I'm so sorry. At least on my Facebook page, Jenna, it says that our live video has been interrupted. And the live video has ended. That's what it says.
Well,
Let's just take a moment. Let's pause before Debbie gives us any more.
I don't think
Pearls of
so.
wisdom?
I see it still going.
Okay. On my computer, it did something weird. Continue.
Okay.
Sorry,
Refresh
Debbie.
on your computer.
Do your thing.
That's important. Where was I?
I feel
want-
like Rachel would have texted.
Okay, great. Okay, so the hidden tips and tricks.
So I'll see parents posting and I'm quick to reply, just call the school a bunch of times and they'll move you up. We are not able to do that. No way, no how. I would love to show you our little system, but basically it gives us a list of students. We have to go to the next student. If I had one opening, I go to that student. I contact the parent. If they say yes, I accept and I'm done. Or if they say no, I decline and then I can go to the next student. There is nothing I can do to skip those students. It's all locked down. So it's not as if, and I'll have parents say, oh, my kid's middle school said if they write a letter of recommendation, you'll let them in. Nope, we have to go by the list. And you'll remember those points that we were just talking about. None of those points have anything to do with the qualities of that child. So there's nothing involved in this where kids that are smarter or have better grades or have better test scores get moved higher on the list. That's not the way it works. Other than gifted magnets, yes, you have to be gifted or be designated as high achieving if it's a gifted high achieving magnet. But beyond that, there is nothing about the child that moves them up. So yeah.
So
The
can I
trick that
just,
oh, sorry, go Nick.
sorry. I just want to make it again, just to reiterate this point. and I don't mean to belabor it, but like magnets can be about like all sorts of things, right? And the word magnet is really like, we are specializing in this one thing. We're specializing in the performing arts. We're specializing in science. You have a kid who's like burning to like learn how to, I don't even know, weave baskets. Like this is where you're going to weave baskets, right? This is the spot for that student, right? Debbie, is this correct? Do I have this correct?
Yes.
Great. Just wanted to say that again to everybody, that the word magnet does not mean your kid is a Mensa member, with the high IQ, built differently, is going to be
Right.
going to college when they're 11.
Right. And by being accepted, it doesn't mean that they now have a gold star on their head as being any more special. As I said, they're all special to us and to their teachers in their school, but they're not more special than any of the other kids. Sometimes district employees will say, but isn't there a professional courtesy? If I go to that school, I work at that school or I work for the district? Absolutely not. To give you an idea how tight they are on that, my mom used to be our school district's legislative analyst. My kid sat on a waiting list for 3 years. So no, even though she was friends with the superintendent at the time, routinely had lunch with them, nope, kid sat on a waiting list. So it's not who you know in this case. It's just because it's court-ordered desegregation, it is very closely monitored. And we can't screw this up or we get slapped with huge fines that are horrible.
You are the best person to talk to us about this.
Thank you.
Oh my God.
So here's my question.
Mhm.
I have always been told that if you are looking to game the system, right? If you're just looking to get points, that you should only put one magnet and not three.
That is a good question. And that's also a good question, even if you're just trying to get into a school. So if there were 3 different schools like community charter that had humongous waiting lists, it really wouldn't matter. You could put all 3. If you made the mistake and put down community charter and a Broadus that doesn't, then you're going to get in and you're not going to be getting the results of the game you are hoping to play. Now, for parents that are considering applying to a magnet, and they will, I see this happen all the time with parents who apply to our magnet and then feel they have to put down a second or third choice. And because my school for 9th grade typically has a pretty long waiting list, they get into one of the other schools and then they're upset because now they're not on my waiting list. And they're saying, but I really wanted your school, but they got into, I'm gonna pick on Monroe was one of the cases where that happens. Nothing wrong with Monroe, but they applied to Monroe's government law magnet and they got in. And then they're like, but no, I really wanted your school. Well, if the school you really want, if you have your heart set on one school, that's absolutely hands down the school you want more than anything, only put that school, because you're either going to get in or you're going to be on the waiting list. If you have 2 or 3 schools that you're thinking, wow, I'd be thrilled with any one of them. I really don't care. They're all absolutely phenomenal. In fact, I can't even make a decision because they're all so great. Then put down the 2 or 3 schools, because then, you more likely to get into one. Now, if all 3 were like community charter that had huge waiting lists, you may not get into any of them. In the case you didn't get into any of them, you will be on the waiting list of your first choice school. But in the case that you could have got into your second or third, and then you won't be on the waiting list of your first choice school.
Okay, so I want to clarify because that was one of our big questions.
That's
So let's say school A is my first choice. I get into school B, but I'm on the wait list for school A.
Nope.
If I turn down school B,
Nope.
I'm just out, period.
No. If you get into school B, you're not on the wait list for school A.
Got
You're
it.
only
Okay.
on one list. You either got into a school or you're on one wait list. If you didn't get into any,
Oh,
so let's say you put down school A, B, C, and all of them are like community charters with really, really long waiting lists, and you didn't get into any, then you're on the wait list for school A. If you put down school A, B, and C have smaller numbers of people applying, and luck of the draw, you get into one of those, you are not on the wait list for the others. So only put down second or third choice if you really would be happy going to that school.
I think that's huge, right? Like only put down a second and third choice if that's actually somewhere you want to go.
Only put down a choice of anything if that's where you want to go. I mean, why would you apply to school you don't like? And you can apply to magnets, and you can apply to an SAS program in a different school. You could apply to an affiliated charter, one of those dual language programs. You can apply to multiple programs, and you may actually get into program no more than one school from each category, but you may get into a magnet, an SAS, a dual language. Then you have to make a choice. And when you accept one, you're declining all the others.
Okay. So that was another big question we had, was can you apply to multiple sections? And the answer to that is yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you're applying to magnet, you should always apply to I'm going to call it a regular school, whether that's your zone of choice or homeschool, because you're not guaranteed to get into a magnet, and you want to have something lined up that you're happy with.
Can we talk about the wait list?
Sure.
How then are students chosen from the wait list? How do you sort of get your spot in that wait list line?
So how does the lottery work, if you will?
Yeah.
You're asking how do they get ranked, so to speak? Okay, so those points we were talking about, max of 23. So they take all the kids that apply to a school and then they sort them by points. And so let's say a school has room for 90 kids and 10 of those have 23 points. So those 10 get in automatically. Then they go to the next level, which is 20 points. Let's say there's 7 of those. So now they've got 17, and I'm not going to bother to do the math all the way down. But at some point, they keep accepting until they get to a number where the remaining seats is not as big as the number on the list. Those people are randomly sorted. Let's say it's 8 points. So a few of the kids with 8 points get in, the remaining don't. They take the 8-point kids, randomly sort them. The top 8, the top however many are left get in. Then they randomly sort the 4s, and then they randomly sort the 0s, or the 3s, then the 0s. And so that's how my list looks.
Okay, so
Okay.
it's sort of filtered, right?
Mhm.
Those with the highest number of points are more likely to get in. And then
Yes.
as spaces open up, those folks with smaller number of points are then sort of randomized and picked.
Right. And so or sorted for the waiting list. So if a parent was wondering, am I going to get in? If a parent called me and said, well, I have 4 points, what are my chances? And I could say, well, of all the students we got last year, we were able to take in this many out of this many with 4 points. So that's kind of your odds, but compared to last year, again, that doesn't necessarily predict this year, especially in pandemic times when, both last year and this year, nothing like any other year we've dealt with.
So this is one that always kind of threw me for a loop, is getting a call on, August 29th, when you're already going, you've started, your kids in class, got their teachers, and you get a call, hey, you just got into your first choice. Do you still lose your points?
Yes.
If you decline at that point?
Yes. So if you decline in the first semester, you lose as I said, you're going to lose those matriculation or waiting list points. You retain the others, sibling and all of that, but you're going to lose those for the following year. That isn't true if you are able to be picked up at the second semester. So a student, let's say, applied to my school, I didn't have a space, but a kid moved away this year. And so I'm going to call somebody in January and say, guess what? You have a spot. If they decline me, they don't lose their points at that time. But anytime during the first semester, which is the first 4 weeks of school, yes, they will lose their points if they decline.
Okay.
Can we talk a little bit about like the babies? So in terms of figuring out like how do you get your kindergartner or your first grader identified as gifted and applying to those gifted magnets before the OLSAT is given?
Okay, so there's a page here, and this is on the unified enrollment on the magnet one. You can click on a link that says criteria for gifted and highly gifted. if you're applying, well, first of all, let's get into the difference between gifted and highly gifted. In order to go to a highly gifted school, you have to be tested by a school psychologist, deemed highly gifted, and that has to be done and in the system before November 12th. So I know that somebody asked, well, what if they're going to be tested, but it hasn't happened?
Right.
If it doesn't happen before the closing date of magnet applications, then they're not going to be deemed highly gifted.
Do the results have to happen before November 12th? Or like, let's say like your kid takes the highly gifted test on November 1st.
They have to be identified prior.
Okay, so they
prior
have to be identified prior to November 12th.
Yeah, so don't waste your points on applying to a highly gifted magnet if your child isn't already identified as highly gifted. Now, for a gifted magnet, there are a couple of ways. First of all, if they're already identified as gifted and they're in LAUSD, you don't have to worry about anything. That kind of happens all automatically. There's nothing you have to do. If they are not identified gifted, but they're in LAUSD, principals will get a list, and it's here. There's some criteria. Principals will get a list of students that are applying to a gifted magnet sometime December, January, and they have to go through and look at each of those students and say, yes, they meet the criteria. In essence, to boil it down, and it says it here, is that they're basically working 2 years above grade level, but it has specific criteria there. I hate when people read to me stuff that's in print, so I'm not going to do that to you. So principals get to identify. Now, if your child is attending a non-district school, like they're coming into kindergarten, or they are going, they're going to a private or a non-district charter, then there are verification forms that have to be done, and it is filled out by the principal of that school. So I had to do that when my youngest, who's now 31, went to Balboa, which started in first grade then. I'm not sure if they still do.
Still does.
And her, because she was I kept her at her preschool, which also had kindergarten. And because that teacher was the only one who could understand what that child said. Anyway, so she had to verify that my daughter met those criteria. She was subsequently identified as gifted. Now, let's say though, she hadn't been identified gifted later on and then wanted to apply to, I'm gonna just pick out of a hat, Porter. She has to be recertified for the next level if she isn't identified. So
are there other ways? Are there other ways other than the OLSAT to identify a child as gifted?
Yeah, so they also can look at, if not for highly gifted, but for regular gifted, is that a word? They use the other test scores. Obviously not having SBAC.
Right.
It's kind of thrown a wrench into some of it. Somewhere it's on here, but they're basically looking for students that are above a threshold percentile wise.
And it has to be for more than 1 year, right?
Let's see.
I think
Yeah,
it was
it's
like
for 2 years.
Student received total national percentile scores of 85% or above on a district approved standardized test. And then it talks about SBAC and all of that. But it doesn't say here that it's over a period of time. But
I think it's I think it's all shifted now because there is no SBAC and there wasn't, I mean, I know when we were doing our middle school applications, like for where he goes, you needed to submit SBAC scores. I was like, surprise.
So, and here's an important thing. If you apply to a gifted magnet, let's say you have a child that's not presently in LAUSD, yes, you have to turn in that verification form. You also still have to apply to a magnet. So the whole point system works the same for gifted magnets as it does for all of the others. And just because you're gifted doesn't mean you're guaranteed a spot. It just means you have to be gifted to be accepted, but it doesn't determine that you are, the point system is still the same.
I'm going to need a giant flow chart. Debbie, could you make that for us? Just a giant room-sized flow chart.
I did give you all the links to these, so maybe you want to share those with parents later.
For sure. We'll throw them up
I mean,
underneath where this video is.
You can even put them in the chat and we can pop them onto the Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I can also put it on Facebook later too.
And it's on
not-
that little document that we were kind of working
Oh,
from.
perfect. So we
Yeah,
could
yeah,
just use that. Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
somebody asked, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but I want to honor the question. They're asking, how will City of Angels assess gifted high ability students?
I'm assuming, and then, so this is just an assumption, that they're going to follow the same protocol that we do now. The principal will have to identify. Now, I've seen principals do this where they just go in and look at their test scores and go, oh yeah, obviously. And, the kids got straight A's or whatever. And others that are like, let me send a memo out to the teachers and ask them how they're doing. And I think they do that when it's maybe less clear based on, say, test scores. So I'm assuming they're going to use the same process.
Okay.
They do have a principal and they do have a teacher. So you could do the same thing.
And then this question, which I think is probably unique to a few different schools. It says, if your home school has a special gifted program within the school, do you have to apply separately for that?
That depends. All schools, all resident schools should have some sort of gifted program. We all have to serve gifted students just as we have to serve any student with special needs. So if the gifted program at your school is just where they're, providing enrichment for those kids, then you don't have to apply. Being gifted is enough. If your program is through an SAS program, then yes, you would have to apply to that.
So you would apply through SAS. And then I know, I know specifically, there's one middle school where they have a specific gifted program, which even though it's on the campus of the school, you do have to do a complete separate application for it. So I think that the answer to the question is really, you need to find out what kind of gifted program it is, and then figure out from there how to apply to it.
Right. So in the days prior to SAS even existing, all schools had a gifted program. And if you were gifted, they just said, hey, come to our, balloon animal class after school or whatever it was. Or maybe they had a pull out program, or they did special field trips or clustered the kids into classes. There are a variety of ways. In secondary school, generally, it means putting them in honors classes. But with the advent of SAS programs, that has an application process.
And
Okay.
again, if you are a resident of a program, right? If you live in the neighborhood and there's an SAS and you are labeled gifted, you automatically have space in that school's SAS program. That's my understanding.
No, you have to apply to that.
What?
Yes.
What are we doing at Marshall? What is going on?
Well, maybe they don't get, so many, or maybe they have built their program to fit the number of gifted kids they have, and they just do it that way. Schools have to fill programs, because a program, especially in a high school, doesn't work if you have 15 kids in it, because you can't schedule classes with 15 kids.
Right.
So they may be doing other things to help make sure that their schools are filled. A question I get, and somebody asked this earlier, which is better, SAS or a magnet? That depends, on the school. I can speak better to high school just because that's where my experience is. Our school has an SAS program where all the kids take honors classes and AP classes. And then we have our magnet, which happens to, at our magnet, run all the classes as honors or AP. That's not true of every magnet. So in the case of Silmar Charter High School's magnet, then if you are in the magnet, you're getting all honors and AP classes. The advantage is our magnet is 425 students to SAS's program is, I don't remember if they're running 30 to 60 at each grade level, but much smaller. So that means I can have a more, a master schedule that allows for more flexibility than they can. Now, that's not necessarily true at every school. There may be a school that has a huge SAS program and a small magnet. Maybe their magnet doesn't run honors classes all the way through, or maybe it runs no honors classes. I don't know. So it isn't inherent to the title magnet that it would be better in terms of honors and SAS or gifted, or not better. You can't make that assumption. You would have to find out with the particular program you're interested in.
I mean, I feel so full of information and so happy with all this information.
Most people who hear me talk are like, oh, stop.
No, I mean,
Into the numbers too much.
no, this is what we needed. This is what we wanted.
So-
And I know Debbie's so incredible about being in the group. And I know if people watching this and reading through the chat have questions afterwards, and Debbie, would you mind like peeking at the chat over the next couple days to see if there's any more questions
So you're talking about the chat in
in
our-
in Facebook?
yeah. And you guys have probably noticed I have a tendency to jump, especially if somebody gives, some of those commonly held misconceptions about magnets, like,
Right.
no, that's not how it works. As nicely as I possibly can, because I understand this is confusing and people will get poor information even from school site members because they don't know.
Right.
It's too complicated. Magnet coordinators probably the only ones who know, the vast majority of this, but the clerical person who picks up the phone and answers is not necessarily going to be an expert in all of this. No offense to that person.
I mean, I think the moral of the story, within LAUSD is to ask all the questions, right? To get on the phone, to send the email, right?
But ask the question of the people who really know. I saw one thread a few days ago where it's like, well, just keep asking a bunch of people. Well, that doesn't help if you're asking the bus driver. He knows all
Right.
about driving buses.
Right, ask the right people.
So ask, if it's a magnet question, ask a magnet coordinator. Just asking the office clerk is not necessarily your best bet. Another misconception is that if you are attending the resident school that has the magnet you want to go to, that you have a priority. You do not. Because remember, we're an integration program where theoretically we're trying to get kids from outside, not trying to get everybody that lives in that neighborhood to go to the magnet, but get kids from outside. Now you don't get denied because you are a resident of that neighborhood, but it doesn't help you either. And that's one thing I've heard clerks tell parents, oh, well, just come in the resident school and then you have a better chance. That's not true. You just make it easier for me to get your kid out of class and go, guess what? You have a spot. That's all.
Can I ask you sort of like a evaluative question?
Sure.
Do you feel like this system has done what it intends to do?
In terms of integration?
Yeah.
Well, we haven't been slapped with another court order to integrate, so I guess so. However, there has been a lot of, I guess the word they used to use is white flight from our district, whether it's to go to non-district charter schools, private schools, get a permit to go out of the area for those that live on the perimeter. So the percentage of white students in our schools does not necessarily reflect the percentage of white students living in the boundaries of LAUSD. So magnets probably have attracted back at least some of those people, obviously not all, because there's still people going to private schools. So it's helped in that respect, I guess. But our district is less and less white, not that I think that's a bad thing. It's just in terms of the court order, it gets kind of difficult to integrate a school where you really don't have very many kids that are white. And that brings me to another thing. When they're looking at kids, it's white or not. It's not like we have a percentage of Asians we're trying to get, or a percentage of Black people and a percentage of Latinos. It's just most of the schools are set at 70-30. So my school, not all, some of the earlier ones are 60-40, but my school theoretically should be 70% not white and 30% white. To be honest with you, we're about 3% not white. I'm sorry, 3% white. So we never get the white students applying to our area. We live in a predominantly not white area. So that's kind of what applies.
So interesting. Thank you.
I think the neighborhood kind of factors into that, right? Like it's, again, the same thing. And it's hard to get on a bus for hours a day, right? So I think the neighborhood is also.
And there's another wrench in this, and maybe I'm divulging too much inside stuff about LAUSD.
Give it to us.
Give it all. We love it.
I want to say in 2008 or 9 or so, they froze the bus routes. So if your school had bus routes, you know, to whatever neighborhoods, that's where it got stuck because we had a huge budget crisis. And normally they would look at the bus routes every year, see where kids had applied, realign. And, you know, let's say if suddenly I had a kid applied from Taft's area and I didn't before, then I'd have a bus route coming from that area. That particular year for my school, we didn't have any bus routes from the West Valley. All of our bus routes are East Valley schools, and then we have one down. Okay, if you grow up in Silmar, everything on the other side of the Santa Monica Mountains is downtown. So downtown, anything between Pasadena and Santa Monica, Disneyland, and those hills is downtown to us. So I have kids, I have a bus route from downtown, but nothing from west of the 405 freeway. So I'm supposed to be integrating my school, but I don't have a route to places where a higher percentage of white students live. Now the parents can come, they can drive if they like getting on the 101 freeway or going cross town, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, I still see like in front of Jefferson where I taught in South LA for years, like there was a stop there for students who were being bussed out of that neighborhood. And now every morning at Marshall, when I drive up, there's also a collection of, you know, families with the family pets waiting with their students to hop on the bus. So they still exist, but it is not the same as it was when perhaps Jenna and I were in school and people were being carted around the city using district transportation.
Yeah, we also increased the distance that a student needs to live to get transportation. So for elementary schools, it's still 2 miles, but for high schools, it's 5 miles, but it's 5 miles as the crow flies. So anybody who's familiar with Silmar, which is on the edge of the earth as far as LAUSD is concerned, we're the northernmost high school. I mean, you drive a couple minutes past our school and you are out of LA entirely. If you were going to Monroe High School, or if you live just our side of Monroe High School, you don't get a bus. There's no way you would walk from the they're at Nordhoff, the Nordhoff exit to the 405 all the way up to almost the 210 freeway if you were a student, but that's the sad reality.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hard part, right? Is like we give it just enough. And then, I mean, I was dealing with that earlier this year with a family. It's hard.
Yeah.
Well, it's 8:30 and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, including yours. So thank you for doing this with us.
You're welcome.
We really appreciate it.
And I'll check out the chat and answer any questions that need answering.
Thank you so much, Debbie. We really, really do appreciate it. And I know that folks, you know, throughout this time have expressed their appreciation for your expertise and your time as well.
Yes.
So thanks again.
Okay, thanks.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Good
you. Have a
luck.
great day tomorrow.